Hello BookTube, and welcome back as we have entered a new year. It is that time when we all recap our years and talk about our favorite things. So this is the best of the year for nonfiction. So I decided I was going to split things up because I came out with quite a lot of books, unfortunately. Initially I was thinking I'm going to be really cutthroat, and then I just love books too much. So I have a pretty awesome and slightly sizable list to go through here. I did not pick any specific number. I don't care about rounding out to a certain number. They're not ranked in any particular order. So these are just a jumble of my favorite things. Starting with the books that I kind of have on hand, I have My Life in France by Julia Child and Alex Prudhomme. This is such a delight because we are really getting a memoir of Julia Child's time in France as she's moving there with her husband, and she was not at all the typical housewife. She is very boisterous and loud, and this American going into France, her personality really stood out. And so this is the journey of her becoming a foodie, because she really could barely cook at the time that she moved there, or really couldn't cook almost. And she becomes really invested in the French food culture, in learning, and eventually in going to culinary school. She really is determined to make that happen for herself against all the odds. And so it's just this journey of perseverance and joy of food and life that I think really captures such a beautiful story and really is easy to connect with. So I just love this, and very unsurprising because I think Julia Child is someone that touched so many people's hearts. Next we have How to Be Perfect, the correct answer to every moral question by Michael Schur. So as it says on the tin, Michael Schur is the creator of The Good Place. If you have not seen The Good Place, you should probably start there perhaps, because this feels very in conversation with that show. There is a thread through that show of afterlife and morality that is explored by a philosophy teacher teaching a character who has poor morals. And this book very much feels like you are sitting in on those lessons and learning with him. We cover everything from white lies to the trolley problem. You get very basic fundamentals of philosophy and morality and ethics, some of the classical philosophers, and we work into even more modern problems like social media ethics and dealing with problematic artists. Do you consume their work, separating art from artists? Is that possible? Should you return your cart? Things like that are really touched on here in such a poignant way. I started this on audio, and I do love the audio. I highly, highly recommend the audio because it does actually have the Good Place cast running through, and they're sort of playing out scenes for the most part. So they show up very much. But as soon as I was into the audio, I knew I loved it so much, and I had to pick up the physical copy because this is absolutely fantastic, and I could see myself reading it over again. So loved this book so much. It's one that's going to be sticking with me. Then we have The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, an appropriately bleak cover for a very bleak book. However, I think the bleakness is difficult. It's getting across the climate change story and information, telling us that perhaps predictions haven't been bleak enough and we really should be preparing for the absolute worst and then hoping that it doesn't actually get that bad. We should be prepared to handle it, though, if it's possible. But I think he does such a good job of making this very accessible to read on what is a very difficult topic, focusing on short, sharp chapters that are very limited in scope. But he starts the book by expressing the concept of cascades, of the cascading effect of one thing going wrong having a whole range of impacts. And that sets us up for every other topic that he wants to cover, and how talking about one very focused topic over 2 or 3 pages might expand out into a number of different topics as he goes along. And so he does keep that in very consumable bites. And I think that's the best way to take this in, because it is such a heavy topic. And he does, as we get toward the end, kind of come towards what are the solutions, and the ways we need to frame our thinking is more what he's tackling, rather than here's X, Y, or Z scientific solution. It's we need to think about problem solving in a new way to deal with this. And I think that was a really great way to handle this. So I absolutely loved The Uninhabitable Earth, and I'm glad I finally got to it, because it's been well loved on BookTube for multiple years now, and I've kind of been missing out. Next is Little Brother by Ben Westhoff. And this is such a compelling book to read because it is investigative journalism and true crime with memoir mixed in. So we're following his backstory, Ben's, of moving to St. Louis for college and getting caught up in life there and becoming a journalist. And during his time there, he began participating in the Big Brothers program and made this great connection and relationship with a young underprivileged Black boy. And that relationship is really the heart of this story, because they're two people from different worlds in the same city. And he loved his little brother, but had no way to kind of know or understand everything that he was facing in his day-to-day life. And so as an older teenager, his little brother is shot and killed. And this is the story of him investigating that situation. And was it a senseless crime in a violent part of the city, or was it a targeted attack based on this life that he didn't know his little brother had? So it really is delving into that through looking into the conflict of race and class in this city. And not only that, but the similar situations that are going on around the country in the US currently. And so I think it just did such a good job of looking at the complexities of that, and especially being someone who is from St. Louis, it really laid out the map almost for you of how divided the city is, and the history that has built up to where we are today. So I just think it did such a good job of really laying that out and giving it a coherent story to voice what's gone on in the city racially and the systemic forces that are at play there. So really, really nuanced story. I enjoyed it so much I did a full review for this one, so I will link that down below. Next we have a graphic nonfiction, and that is 10 Days in the Madhouse, originally written by Nellie Bly and adapted to comic work by Brad Ricca and Courtney C. So this was an interesting one. I kind of just saw it on the shelf and picked it up and then wound up loving it. Specifically, let's start with the artwork, because the artwork is so gorgeous and very heavily lined. Again, I will link the video down below. You can go see some examples of that in my original recap on the book. But it's beautifully black and white, which I don't always love, but I think it really suited this. The tones and shades are so well done of this story, which the story here is Nellie Bly was an investigative journalist in the 1800s, late 1800s, looking into the fact that women were simply being shuffled off into madhouses, these asylums, where they were basically forgotten and kept there by families who found them inconvenient, or they were present and didn't speak the language, and so they were treated as insane and locked up and kept there for basically their whole lives with no means of reaching out and escaping. And so these very predatory practices were present there. So Nellie Bly had herself committed and lived through 10 days and did this incredible work of investigative journalism by going through that scenario herself and writing about it and ending up posing reforms to the system as a result of that. So really incredible story and work that is laid out on the page in a picture format here that I just loved. Then we have Antigone Rising, The Subversive Power of Ancient Myths by Helen Morales. This was so good, and we need to get the hype train going on this, I think, because I believe it kind of went under the radar a little bit because it came out in 2020 around the time of lockdowns, and I think I've only seen one other person talking about it. So please go check this out if you have any interest in the topics covered here, because it's a collection of essays really jumping from topic to topic, and it's trying to get across how connected we are with antiquity and the ways that they were using ancient myths to process things that were happening at the time and the ways that we can use them. The connections between antiquity and the stories of their myths and things like Me Too or Black Lives Matter. Things like associating Beyonce being at the Louvre and the art that she has emulated in videos and performances that really was mythologizing these antiquity stories. And so I think that there's so much to draw from there, that she got across not just those direct aspects, but also things that are tied to who makes it into a museum, who has that access. And she has a lot of social commentary to this kind of historical lens. So I just love that framing. I think that was the voice and the frame of this collection of essays were stunning. So definitely check that one out. All right, we're in the home stretch, last couple of books, and they're both memoirs. So we've got Baggage, Tales from a Life Fully Packed by Alan Cumming. This is the second of his memoirs that I have read, and I, of course, listened to it on audiobook because he narrates it himself, and the audio narration is so good. So in the previous memoir, he discussed his familial relationships. Not My Father's Son is that memoir. And this one, he's talking really much more through his experiences of coming up in kind of a small Scottish town and breaking out of that life, and then his break into stage and screen, his career, and his personal romantic relationships especially, as well as his celebrity connection. So we get some good celebrity dirt there. So I think we do have a funny element to this. He's always very comedic and witty and has good banter, but it's got dark elements as well, talking about kind of mental health struggles through all of this. And so I think it has that good mix of levity and heavier elements. But I just love hearing his stories, and his sense of storytelling is incredible. So this is definitely one to pick up and listen to, have him tell those stories into your ear. Interestingly, for both this book and the next book I want to talk about, there's a sense of signposting, and he is signposting through the story the progression of LGBT rights, and specifically marriage equality in both the US and the UK, because he was kind of living in both places significantly as a celebrity. In both places he was back and forth a lot. And so there were major things happening in the progression toward that he kind of brings up as an element of being connected with people who were directly impacted by that in the community, as an LGBT person himself. So yeah, it was really interesting to see that broader scope of something going on nationally at both US and UK levels, through the storyline. So really fantastic memoir. Lastly, on my nonfiction list is Hannah Gadsby's 10 Steps to Nanette. If you somehow don't know who Hannah Gadsby is, she is a stand-up comedian from Tasmania who broke out with a wildly popular Netflix stand-up special, kind of out of nowhere for those of us in the US, and it was titled Nanette. And so this is in many ways the story of her getting there, of how she wrote the jokes and all of that, but it's much more than that. I would say if you have no exposure to her, you probably do want to go watch the stand-up special first, because it is very funny, but it's also extremely difficult. It confronts really hard, emotionally challenging topics. And I think you need it in that kind of bite size to get the sense of her tone and what you're going to be facing content-wise in terms of tackling this book, because this does go into all of those elements in much more depth and breadth, in terms of this being much more expanded than a small stand-up special. So beyond the stand-up special and just how she got to it, it's the story of her life. It goes all the way back to her childhood growing up in Tasmania, and it kind of shows us what it would be like to grow up there, what the community and sentiments are like there. Growing up as a questioning person who didn't really fit gender or sexuality wise, but wasn't able to be open with that because of where she lived. as I mentioned in the previous book, this also does very much signpost the legality of not just marriage equality, but the legality of being LGBTQ in a place like Tasmania. And so she talks about that in Tasmania, Australia, and then eventual marriage equality discussions as she grew up. But this is such a strong background of her life, of the really difficult things she went through, with both humor and heart and some tears. And I don't know how someone could read this and not take away some empathy for what she's been through, or empathy for other people who are different just in general. She does talk about her journey as well to finding out as an adult that she has autism, and that unlocking so many answers for her about why she was kind of the way she was growing up, and how she has been with people her whole life. So there are these humorous stories about her social awkwardness throughout this that, suddenly click into place. And that has all built her into the person that she is, and coming into this stand-up career, writing this really difficult and personal stand-up special that she intended to be kind of the end for her, because effectively it was so confronting what she was going through. So yes, I absolutely would heartily recommend that you check out that stand-up special and jump into reading this memoir, because it's probably my favorite thing I've read this year. So definitely check it out, especially on audio. So that's my best nonfiction of the year for 2022. I had such a great reading year that I had so much to choose from. And let me know down below what your best nonfiction reads were, because I'm always looking for more options. If you have a channel, leave me a link to your video if you've done something similar with wrapping up your nonfiction favorites. I would love to check it out. So that's it for me today, BookTube. Thank you so much for watching.